Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby, right back at your retrospective. In this installment of the retrospective, we shall be covering one of the best episodes in the entire anime, episode 65, Master 2.0, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Knuckle Joe on the Run. This episode was originally released in Japan on January 11th, 2003 as the 65th episode, while the English dub was released on March 13th, 2004, also as the 65th episode. This episode marks the third and final time Knuckle Joe appears as a major guest star, but before we go further on that, let us start with this episode's story. The episode opens to a shot on a distant Mars-like planet that has become overrun with monsters. We see Knuckle Joe, who is voiced by the highly talented Kevin Kalak in the English dub, and Minami Tokayama in the Japanese original. While the Japanese voice is perfectly fine, I have to admit the Boston accent of the English dub gives him a bit more character than seen in the Japanese original. Regardless of his voice, he is pushed straight through a wall made out of brick. We see a mighty mechanical beast, Masher 2.0, which, in addition to being the monster of the week, also gave the episode its name. Normally, I wait to go into the monster of the week, but since it's introduced right off the bat, let us go ahead and talk about him now. This is Masher 2.0, who is in lore considered to be the most powerful demon beasts of all of Nightmare Incorporated roster, outside of Nightmare himself, of course. Now, this is technically an enemy from the games, but it's been so redesigned. It's genuinely a radical departure and a amazing upgrade from the original Masher, and really should be considered its own thing. Now dark gray instead of purple. The mace is now black and gold instead of dark gray and white. His arms and hands now have additional armor, and his visor now has a more angrier expression, as well as being red instead of black. Most prominent of these changes are the cross-shaped mark on his chest, which does something that'll be important later in the episode, so I won't elaborate on it now as to avoid spoilers, and prominent wings plus a jetpack that allow for him to fly more effectively. In terms of voice acting, he's actually quite lacking, being silent even compared to the original Masher, which at least had some kaiju sounds effects coming out of him. Overall, it's an amazing foe, both design-wise and, as we shall see in the episode, leaves quite the impact. If they ever bring a Masher back as a full boss in a mainline game, I hope they take aspects of this specific design, as I think it'll make it more interesting. Knuckle Joe struggles to recover as Masher 2.0 breaks the wall down, allowing for a set of smaller generic monsters to attack, including a gray dragon, a cyclops yellow armadillo, unicorn walruses, and a giant centipede. Knuckle Joe knocks the armadillo out with an uppercut blast, and then blasts the other monsters, including an ammonite, a pterosaur cyclops, as well as that gray dragon, before roundhouse kicking them to dust, causing a big explosion that, completely envelops the monsters, including Masher 2.0 in a blast. Despite this, it is revealed that the attack had no effect, and Masher 2.0 approaches slowly, and I do mean slowly, for indeed, the injured child, Knuckle Joe, manages to outpace the monster, eventually heading through a ruined building into an enemy transportation device, as Knuckle Joe breathes heavily, and we cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to King Dedede's castle on a dark and stormy night. We see Meta Knight standing on a balcony, looking into the sky, concerned about things. We see Tough playing with a soccer ball indoors. His mother complains to him about playing indoors and tells him to take it outside, but Tough is very hesitant given the weather is so bad, as you see a lightning flash to support his claim. Cerebrum says the weather has taken a nasty detour, while Tiv says she has never seen weather this bad, as the camera pans out into the area. We then cut to the throne room where the monster delivery system activates, and via the power of reuse animation, we see Knuckle Joe arrive. We cut to outside in the hallway where Sword Knight and Blade Knight are walking. They see the light emanate from the open door of the throne room as the delivery system activates and go over there to investigate, as Knuckle Joe collapses out of the room to their shock. We then cut to a nightmare that Knuckle Joe's having as he's standing in a dark void while avoiding fiery mace balls that fall down on him. He sees Kirby, who gets crushed, and then he sees the apparition of his father, holding out a mysterious pendant that he had left to him, as we had seen in previous episodes. Knuckle Joe tries to go over to him, only for him to be crushed himself by a fiery mace. Boom! This, of course, seeing his friend Kirby and father getting destroyed, wakes the boy up, and he seems to be in bed. Kirby enters the room as we see the first major change between versions. In the Japanese original, Kirby says Knuckle Joe's name when entering the room, while the English dub changes him to saying Poyo, which is honestly a pretty good change, because frankly, the less Kirby talks, the better, in my opinion. It just always seems kind of weird when he talks. Some might say this is a very minor change to take note of, but this episode, more than most episodes I've discussed, has few, if any, major scene changes. Most of the changes relate to dialogue differences, which is honestly a bit refreshing, to see something not quite as bastardized by 4Kids for once. Tiff brings in a platter of tea and explains to him how Sword and Blade Knight brought him into the room. The two look at each other, and Tiff realizes something is wrong and asks him about it. But he tells her that no one has to worry about him and gets up to leave. Kirby, however, stops him, putting his hand into his mouth and then lifting him up and putting him back in bed. He says he can fight Kirby with two hands tied behind his back, but Tiff corrects him that they don't want to fight him, but he's in no position to be monster hunting at this time, and he reluctantly agrees to relax for a bit. But soon after starting to relax, he realizes that his pendant that his father gave him is gone and starts looking around for it, as it really freaks him out to have lost it. We cut back to the throne room where we see the pendant was left on the floor, which Tough picks up. Blade Knight and Sword Knight are seen inspecting the transport logs, which confirms the story, as Meta Knight points out how the monster that attacked Knuckle Joe would likely come for him. Tough tries to show Meta Knight the pendant, but King Dedede and Escargoon burst in, stopping that conversation. He demands to know why the kid is in his throne room, and then asks what is that thing that Tough is holding. The boy hides behind Meta Knight, saying it's nothing, but the king demands he hand it over. He makes a break for it, but Escargoon blocks his escape and grabs the pendant. The two struggle as the chain breaks, causing it to fall to the ground, which reveals a little chip, as well as a cute picture of baby Knuckle Joe. Escargoon grabs the object, much to the praise of Dedede, who runs over, as Escargoon explains that it is the pendant that Knuckle Joe got from his father. The king pushes Tough away and asks Meta Knight if the punk really is back, and Meta Knight confirms that Knuckle Joe is indeed here. The king growls in anger, but Escargoon shows the king a memory chip he found behind the portrait of baby Knuckle Joe, and Escargoon explains it must have been hidden by Joe's father when he gave it to his son. The king then says that since Knuckle Joe's father was a great star warrior, it must hold some secrets. The two chuckle and leave to look into it. Strangely, Meta Knight seems to be perfectly alright with this, and that sort of confuses Tough. He then explains that they can look into the chip while they prepare for more pressing issues. Tuff asks what he means by that, and Meta Knight tells Sword and Blade Knight that they must prepare defenses for soon the monster that attacked Knuckle Joe will likely come, as Tuff then realizes that a monster is coming for Knuckle Joe. We cut to the canyons nearby as we see Sword and Blade Knight are outside as they comment on how strange the storm is. We then cut back to Tiff talking with Knuckle Joe, who is talking about the returning Masher. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he's a lot more silent as we see the following flashback, which reuses footage from episode 40, Monster Management, which I've reviewed before and is a great episode, so check that out if you want to learn more about a really good episode worth watching. The English dub has a recap a lot more of what happened in that episode. Honestly, both versions work fine, though the English dub does fail the whole show don't tell principle that is fundamental to storytelling. He concludes the flashback by saying Masher is back. He calls enemy a bastard in the Japanese original, which is just kind of funny, but understandably got removed by 4Kids, and explains that Masher wants revenge. He gets up and saying it doesn't matter how he got back, as this time he's got to face him alone and finish Masher for good. He goes to leave, and Kirby tries to stop him, but Knuckle Joe kicks him away to the door as Meta Knight enters with a Mexican guitar. Tiff explains to the guy that Knuckle Joe wants to leave. The older knight warns him not to act rashly and points out how enemy is probably trying to lure him into a trap so he can be destroyed. To which Knuckle Joe says he must find the medallion that his father trusted to him, and he's lost it. Going to find it, he leaves. Tiff asks Meta Knight on what to do, and he tells her and Kirby to follow after him, and that he'll catch up with them later. We then cut to the inside of a computer as the camera pans out as Dedede and Escargoon are trying to analyze the information within the chip in their laboratory. Dedede asks what is it, to which Escargoon explains that it is blueprints for a strength magnifying device. Dedede is confused / astounded by this. Escargoon explains it can increase someone's natural power 100 times over. As Dedede is excited, it is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says it would be used to power up small fry monsters, and plans with Escargoon's input to sell the machine to enemy for a very high price. Meanwhile, the English dub changes this to him saying that he can now make his own monsters without having to buy from enemy at all. Honestly, both versions are pretty good and in line with the king's greedy nature, but in different ways that both, frankly, work really well, honestly. In either case, the two buffoons laugh evilly as it is revealed that Tough, Folo, and Fala are watching from out of sight. We cut back outside as we see Sword Knight and Blade Knight watching as a large object is delivered to Popstar, crashing into the ground, leaving a huge deep hole that sort of reminds me of that mine from Russia. It starts to glow a mysterious purplish pink that reminds me of Lovecraft's Color Out of Space as we see Masher 2.0 crawling out of the crater. And you really get, a sense of his massive size as he shocks Sword and Blade Knight. Like he's huge. Despite seeing these two, he ignores them, walking past on to his real target, Knuckle Joe. It is here that we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, they seem a great deal more irritated at him not paying attention, with Sword Knight saying he doesn't consider them worth the effort. In the English dub, this annoyance is gone, and they just point out that Master 2.0 is just interested in Knuckle Joe. I think this, of all the changes 4Kid did, is one of the only ones that I consider the most negative, as it sort of removes some of the character to these two, as which already don't get a lot. Regardless, in both versions, they then decide to attack Master 2.0, trying to get him to trip by attacking his feet. Of course, it's not very effective, as his foot armor breaks their swords and he sends them flying with little to no effort. It walks but stops to look at something. Blade Knight says it's invincible, while Sword Knight points it out that someone who is none other than Knuckle Joe has arrived. Knuckle Joe says to Masher that the game is up. The two knights try to warn the kid that he's too weak, and Master's visor glows red and it swings his mace at him, which Knuckle Joe dodges and does a spin kick on him, though the armor means this attack leaves basically no impact. Master pulls back the mace. Interestingly, one of the mace's spikes grazes Knuckle Joe's cheek, which causes him to show a bit of blood, which is one of the few instances of blood seen in 4Kids history. Which it's honestly kind of strange to say. I mean, this is, Kirby right back at you. You never expect such a, series to be able to get away with that. But, I guess it's not that strange, as, Kirby's Dream Land 3 had blood, so it's not that baseless. By the way, I recently reviewed that game if you're interested in learning more. I sadly did make a minor mistake where I named the wrong episode, but I still think you'll like that review. Anyway, back on topic. Master 2.0 approaches Knuckle Joe, who charges the behemoth, dodging another mace attack as he does a smash punch that, you know, again, doesn't really do much to Master 2.0, and then does a spin kick, which again doesn't even really impact Master in any way. Master 2.0 seemingly crushes him, or so it seems, much to the shock of Blade and Sword Knight, but Knuckle Joe was super fast and dodged to a nearby rock formation, to the shock of everyone, including Master. He says that Master may be strong, but is dumb and slow. He then punches the rock formation, raining rocks upon the monster, annoying and distracting him as various other monsters explode, giving Knuckle Joe a chance to hit him clean in the head. Blade Knight explains what just happened, as it turns out that Knuckle Joe was using the rock formation destruction to distract Master so he could get a hit in. Sword Knight points out that it's then revealed the attack didn't even scratch. We see Master 2.0 activate as we cut to Tiff and Kirby arriving. The girl is distressed to see Knuckle Joe is being chased by Masher 2.0. Kirby, however, shows some initiative and points in the air, which causes Tiff to call upon the Warp Star, which Kaboo releases and flies over to them. We see Knuckle Joe really struggling as he's, seen being chased by Masher. We see that he's sent flying by one of his attacks and is about to be crushed, only for the Warp Star to arrive, Kirby jump on it and save Knuckle Joe from being stepped on like a roach. Knuckle Joe thanks Kirby. Sadly, due to the baby's poor driving skills, they rammed straight into the side of the canyon, basically negating the Warp Star for a bit. We then cut back to the castle's laboratory as Escargoon shows the power enhancer glove that kind of looks like a Wii accessory to King Dedede. The king grabs it as Escargoon says he just needs to test it. The king then says he will do a test on Escargoon, which scares Escargoon as he tries to explain it's an unfinished prototype. The king then clobbers Escargoon right in the head, and he says he doesn't really feel any more powerful, to which Escargoon grabs the device and explains it to him that it won't work without a gemstone, as that is needed for it to function. The king thinks it over and realizes there is indeed a place where they can get some gemstones before leaving. Escargoon follows after him, slowed due to the recent injury. Tuff is seen being lowered down by Lolo and Lala, where he sees Knuckle Joe's pendant and grabs it. We then cut back to Knuckle Joe and Kirby, who are, basically hiding in an obscure cave from Masher. He explains to Kirby that Masher is much stronger than before, as he couldn't even dent his vision screen. He then explains that he's got to come up with a new strategy and says that his father's is trying to tell him something which could be used to destroy Masher permanently. Kirby listens, probably not really understanding anything, but is just there for support. We see Masher walking away, as we then cut to Dedede and Escargoon. As we see, they had found Escargoon's, hidden jewel box, which he can use the power of the device. I guess he didn't do a good job hiding it, given how much he cared about it last time. I also like to note that despite him wanting to keep it a secret as to who owns this box, the insignia of the lock has Escargoon's face. Escargoon is, of course, horrified at this, as he's already lost these gems before, back in episode 17, The Thing About the Ring, which I've reviewed before, so check that out if you're interested. He says that the gems could get destroyed, but the king says that everyone has to make sacrifices, and, must be made as they walk down the hall. Escargoon points out how the king wouldn't have the same opinion if they were his gemstones. We see this conversation being ended when a soccer ball kicked by Tuff hits the king right on the head, causing him to drop the box, which La 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 then grabs. Escargoon helps the king recover from his first sports injury, and as he does so, Lolo grabs the machine. After a bit, they see the group has stolen their stuff and chase after them. Luckily, the kids are saved by Meta Knight, who picks them up with Dedede's limousine, being the first person other than Dedede to drive it. The group are seen driving away as the subplot with Dedede just ends, as we don't really see them again for the rest of this episode. We cut back to Masher 2.0, fighting now both Kirby and Knuckle Joe, with little difficulty. We see Meta Knight drive past Masher and up to the pair. Tuff hands Knuckle Joe the power amplification machine, telling him it'll help with them beating Masher. Meta Knight says that there is no time to explain, but he will know what to do. He punches at Kirby, who then sucks up this blast from Knuckle Joe in order to become... Fighter Kirby. First seen in Kirby Superstar. I've gone more in depth for this ability in several previous reviews, those including episode 19, Here Comes the Sun, episode 40, Monster Management, episode 53, Snack Attack Part 2, and episode 58, Enemy Elementary. So check those out if you want to learn more about the specifics of this ability. But let me just keep it brief here and say that it made the transition into the anime very well. The red bandana looks great. Tuff cheers Kirby on, and Meta Knight tells him to distract Masher 2.0 until they can get the machine to work. Meta Knight explains the machine to Knuckle Joe, and Kirby pesters Masher with a warp star. Knuckle Joe puts a ruby in it and tries to punch Masher's direction, but the gem blasts into a bright light, which catches the kid off guard and gets the attention of Masher. Kirby tries to distract it, but having enough of this, Masher spreads its wings and activates its jetpack, hovering into the air. Kirby is stunned while Knuckle Joe says it's about to attack again. He tries again to destroy Masher with another gemstone, but again the gem bursts. We see the wings absorbing some sort of maybe solar energy as Meta Knight tells people to move as it releases a huge Hiroshima Death Star type blast. Tiff can only watch in shock, calling to Kirby as we see the entire area is just devastated by the attack. Luckily, and somehow, they survived this, only being a little buried under some rubble. Meanwhile, Kirby floats down on the Warp Star, clearly out of it. Fololo says that all of them survived, which is good, but Falala points out how all the gems have been broken. Meta Knight says that ordinary gemstones are just too weak for the machine's process, but Tuff suggests an option, which is really the last one they have, and then pulls out the pendant that Knuckle Joe's father gave him. Knuckle Joe, with little hesitation, puts it in, and it shockingly fits into the device, almost as if it was designed to do that. We see Master 2.0 proceed to approach, but Knuckle Joe stands up, and now in a CGI model that, is a bit rough, he, winds up his punch as the monster charges his attack. The machine glows blue, and the two shoot lasers at the other. Knuckle Joe seems to lose his footing, but Kirby helps him regain it. As they shoot the laser, it seems to be evenly matched for a bit, but eventually Master 2.0 is overwhelmed, and his wings break, and the blast hits him, which causes him to explode in a massive blow-up. As we see the scrap flying past Knuckle Joe and Kirby, who are sent flying as a result of the explosion, and the sun rises on a new day. Kirby also recovers and is happy. Tough Man and I full of wander over, but we see Knuckle Joe's medallion turn into essentially nothing. But surprisingly, this is not a sad thing, as Knuckle Joe says the power inside the gym is now within him. Meta Knight is proud of the kid for realizing this, and Tiff runs over and cheers on with Kirby as Knuckle Joe watches, and the episode ends as it fades to black. Now let's go into the positives, negatives, my final thoughts on this episode. First, starting with the positives, I want to just say this plot was really amazing. It seemed like an ultimate conclusion to a trilogy of episodes that Knuckle Joe was part of. You not only see him finally come to terms with a lot of stuff his father said, you also see a genuine threat that really tests his mettle, especially compared to the original encounter with Masher, which, yes, was still a bit of an encounter, but not nearly as so. That and the fact that it's just a really well paced episode. A lot of episodes in this show do sort of start slow, but this episode manages to avoid that by starting in media res as we see Knuckle Joe fighting Masher on a distant planet. Speaking of, the presence of a whole different planet really makes this galaxy seem more large, as it shows that the influence of enemy is quite widespread. Like, think about it. This was probably once a world no different than Popstar, but now it's basically just a ruin, and it seemingly everyone's dead there, which is kind of morbid. Of course, Knuckle Joe is an amazing part of this episode. He really comes full circle, and it's just nice to see him again. Another really big positive was the amazing villain that is Masher 2.0. Not only the most powerful monster in the anime, but also the only one to return in the entire show, which makes a lot of sense, and it really improved in many regards this episode, as he's more of a very invincible wall as opposed to a foe you fight. Like, he's just so massive compared to everyone else. It really is astounding, and I hope that in future games, if they ever bring back Masher as either a mini boss or a boss, they take aspects from this anime. As you know, a lot of Kirby games have an EX mode or a new game plus with redesigned enemies. I think that Master 2.0 would really work on that, especially in, say, Kirby's Forgotten Land type gameplay. A 3D game I think could work really well with this guy, and the huge laser he has really makes up for his slow nature. I also thought the utilization of Fighter Kirby was very interesting. While in most of his other appearances, he makes a pretty stark turnaround in the plot, in this case, he takes more of a supportive role, allowing Knuckle Joe to really not have the limelight stolen from him. And that's very interesting to, see an episode where Kirby getting an ability is not the sole factor depending on whether the monster is beaten. Oh, and all the fighting choreography in this episode is also just astounding. Plus, all the other characters are really neat to see too, and I think that the interactions they all have are really good. The subplot with Dedede was interesting as he investigated the data on the chip, but it is also here where we have to discuss some of the few negatives of the episode, of which really there are only two, so it won't be that bad. First is how the subplot with Dee just kind of ends. I mean, he never even meets Masher at all, nor does he ever really do anything with the info extracted from that ship that he still has, because we never see anything, being deleted. Like, it just seems like they could have done more with it. It's sort of like the Insta Monster mixture from that previous episode that I reviewed, the Empty Nest Mess, which you can watch that episode review if you want to learn more. But it just seems like they didn't really do anything. Like, they introduced a concept, but didn't really do a lot with it. Then again, it is interesting to have a foe that is entirely separate from King Dedede for once. So I guess that's a somewhat of a positive. I just feel like they could have done something with this, concept a bit more. The other negative would be the changes 4Kids made. Most of them are negligible or not really all that important, but it was specifically the ones they did to Sword and Blade Knight that I felt made them lose some of their personality, which they already don't have a lot about. So it's maybe not that big of a deal, but I just feel like they removed it, and I have no idea the nature of why they did that. But both of these are really minor issues, and I still think this is an amazing episode. Probably in my top 10. I don't know if it's the best one in the series, as I'd have to rewatch all these episodes to make a sort of tier list, and, my viewpoints on what is the best episode constantly changes, but this is an episode that you absolutely do not want to skip. It is one that I think you pretty much have to watch to get the best of this series. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. If you like this video, like it. But if you loved it, consider subscribing to my channel, and you'll see more of these videos soon. Join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. And have a wonderful day.